Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel, AnatomyMentor. So today I'm going to discuss the topic of embryology, which is development of the diaphragm. Now, today's learning objectives, we shall be talking about the embryological source tissue of the diaphragm, and also in the end, I'll be talking about the different types of diaphragmatic hernias and a few MCQs that we shall discuss at the end. So let's talk about the formation of the diaphragm. Now, you know the diaphragm is a very important the primary respiratory muscle. So this muscular sheet, you could say, is present between the thoracic cavity above and the abdominal cavity below. Now, when we talk about the formation of the diaphragm, remember there are three origin tissues. Number one, the pair of pleuroperitoneal membranes. Number two, the dorsal mesentery of esophagus. And number three, there is the muscular ingrowth from parietal body walls. So these are the three tissue structures that contribute to formation of the diaphragm. Now here the series of diagrams which are showing us the cross sections in the early weeks of human development in intrauterine life. And we are focusing on development of diaphragm. So in diagram A, this is a cross section which is taken at the level which is showing us the development of diaphragm. And here we can see in the color light blue are the pairs of pleuroperitoneal folds, and they're also called membranes. As they grow, they become thinned and flatten out, then they're called membranes. And this is in the 5th week of development. And you can see they are growing within the passageways, which are pericardio-peritoneal canals. If you recall from the previous lectures, I told you the pericardio-peritoneal canals are the passageways which are present on either side of the primitive gut, and they're the communication between the primitive thoracic cavity above with the primitive abdominal cavity below. So also you can see in this diagram, here is the septum transversum. Septum transversum is the sheet of mesodermal tissue that is located between the vitelline duct below and the primitive thoracic cavity above. Septum transversum itself, remember, does not participate in the formation of the diaphragm, but you can see in the next stage of development in diagram B, which is showing you the 7th week of embryonic development, that the pleuroperitoneal membranes are going to grow over this septum transversum, and as they approach each other, they will also fuse with each other. They will fuse also with this here mesentery of the esophagus. And then let's now look in diagram C, which is the transfer section at the 4th month of intrauterine life. Here you can see that these pleuroperitoneal membranes have fused with the esophageal mesentery, right? And also you can see over here that they have fused to form the central tendon of the diaphragm. Whereas on the periphery, this red colored rim is representing muscular ingrowth from the body wall, right? And also keep this in mind that the muscular ingrowth of the body wall, now this is going to be responsible for the nerve supply of the diaphragm. So related to this, you have to keep in mind that the central portion of the fused pleuroperitoneal membranes, as it is forming central tendon of diaphragm, it also provides a connective tissue scaffold. Scaffold means a framework for the muscle cells, which are migrating from the somatic level, cervical 3 to cervical 5. And then they form the muscular part of our diaphragm. So that is why the nerve supply of the diaphragm is the phrenic nerve, as well as the lower 6 costal nerves. Also keep in mind the crura of the diaphragm is the part which develops within the mesentery of the esophagus. Now, this here in the red box is an important concept to understand. And the concept is that the reason that muscle cells and nerve fibers from cervical segments populate and innervate the diaphragm is because the cervical region is actually the area where the diaphragm originated. So its development originates in cervical region in the 4th week of development. Later in the 6th week of development, because of differential growth, there is going to be a greater growth in the dorsal part of the embryo that causes the diaphragm to move ventrally and caudally to its final location. As a result, the phrenic nerves, it takes the phrenic nerves along with it, and then they have a long course to reach their destination. Now, that we've discussed the formation of the diaphragm, let's talk about the congenital birth defects, which are grouped together as congenital diaphragmatic hernias. So in this, first you've got to keep in mind the prevalence. It's a rare defect occurring in 1 in 2,000 live births. And the defect is basically a herniation. So it's a significant malformation that occurs when the abdominal viscera enter thoracic cavity during early development because of the failure of the diaphragm to form a solid barrier between thorax and abdomen. And this will lead to life-threatening respiratory complications at birth. So the primary type, that is known as the Bochtelek hernia, that occurs when there is a defect in the pleuroperitoneal membrane. So over here you can see that there is the normal human anatomy, and in the normal human anatomy the diaphragm has formed a complete solid barrier between the thoracic cavity above and abdominal cavity below. But in case of a congenital diaphragmatic hernia, which usually occurs on the left side, there is a defect, there is an opening, an abnormal opening within the diaphragm. And this causes the intestinal contents to enter the thoracic cavity. So the most frequent cause is failure of one or both of pleuroperitoneal membranes to close the canals between the abdomen and the thorax. So this results in a large posterolateral opening. Now, what happens is that as the intestinal contents, they have entered the thoracic cavity, which, like I told you, in 85 to 90% cases, it occurs on the left side. And the reason for it occurring mostly on the left side is because of earlier closure of the right pleuroperitoneal canal and the protective presence of the liver on the right side. So that is why this type of congenital diaphragmatic hernia tends to occur more commonly on the left side. Now you can see over here as the intestinal contents, they have entered the thoracic cavity, they are going to cause compression effect on the lung. And this will lead to severe respiratory distress. So the compression effect on the lungs causes the lungs to remain underdeveloped, which is known as hypoplasia. So here you can see the bowel as it has passed through this diaphragmatic defect, the herniated bowel that is now causing a pressure effect on the lungs, and the lungs remain hypoplastic, causing severe respiratory insufficiency, and that directly leads to high mortality at birth. Also, the heart and median sternum, they are pushed to the opposite side. So this can be diagnosed at birth through an X-ray, and the classic imaging findings would be the gas-filled intestinal loops which are visible within the thorax, and also the marked mediastinal shift towards the unaffected side, and compression of lung tissue on the ipsilateral, that is the same side. And also there will be a scaphoid abdomen, or that is the concave abdomen, because of the missing contents. We need to be able to differentiate eventration of diaphragm from congenital diaphragmatic hernia. Now, in eventration of diaphragm, there is no defect or opening within diaphragm, only the level of the diaphragm is higher from its normal location. So here on the left side, you can see this white line is representing the highly placed dome of the diaphragm, the left dome of the diaphragm, and therefore you could see that you would have the gas-filled intestinal loops, which might appear to be in thoracic cavity, but they're not actually in the thoracic cavity, they're still in the abdominal cavity, and this needs to be differentiated from the congenital diaphragmatic hernia. Now, another type of congenital diaphragmatic hernia, other than the one which we have discussed right now, there is the parasternal defect, which is the less common one, which is known as the defect of Morgagni. And this occurs in the parasternal region where the sternal and costal heads of the diaphragm meet. So this is a defect in the anterior part of the diaphragm, and a small peritoneal sac containing its intestinal loops may herniate. This may remain asymptomatic and undiagnosed for years. So this type of congenital diaphragmatic hernia is not going to pose any immediate sort of threat to life, but instead it might remain undiagnosed for several years. So here we're looking at this diagram, which is a section through the diaphragm, and it is showing us the different types of defects. The one we talked about in the start, that was the diaphragmatic hernia of Bochtelek. That is the large posterolateral defect, and that was because of the absence of the pleuroperitoneal membrane. and it is usually, as I mentioned, on the left side. But over here is the one which is the Morgagni's defect, the less common one, the parasternal hernia, which occurs between sternal and costal heads of the diaphragm, and it is in the anterior portion, you can see, of the diaphragm. And over here, this is a diagram which is showing us the diaphragmatic hernia, which was the hernia of Bok-Talat. And this differentiates all of those hernias. The ones in blue are the one which are due to absence of pleuroperitoneal membrane. This would be their location, that is in the posterior part of diaphragm. And here is Morgagni's shown in green, which is the defect, which is parasternal hernia in the anterior part of diaphragm. And we also can have, there can be diaphragmatic herniation in the central tendon of the diaphragm, or in this region over here, which is the region of the esophagus, and that is known as the hiatus hernia. So let's talk about hiatus hernia. So the hiatus hernia, the mechanism is usually a congenitally short esophagus. So the short esophagus causes the pulling up of the upper stomach into the thoracic cavity. And this is limited to the cardiac portion of stomach only, and it can be typically identified in an X-ray when the patient is being investigated for the complaint of gastroesophageal reflux. So GERD, that is gastroesophageal reflux, is a typical complaint in case of hiatus hernia. Here is the normal anatomy showing us the location of this here esophagus and esophagogastric. You can see this is the esophagogastric opening. And over here, there are two types of hiatal hernia, sliding and rolling. Now, in case of sliding hiatal hernia, we can see a portion of the stomach has herniated into the thoracic cavity. This causes a shift in the location of the esophagogastric opening or orifice. The other type, which is the rolling type of hiatal hernia, here the esophagogastric location, that is the orifice, is in its original location, but just adjacent to that, a portion of the stomach has herniated into the thoracic cavity. This is the rolling type of hiatal hernia, also known as paraesophageal hernia. So now that we've discussed the different types of hernias as well as the normal formation of diaphragm, here are some basic MCQs which you should be able to attempt. Number one, the crura of the diaphragm develop within which of the following embryological structures? Which I told you in the beginning that the crura of diaphragm are developing, they develop within mesentery of the esophagus. So B is the answer to question 1. The central tendon of the diaphragm is formed primarily by which structure? So that is the pleuroperitoneal membranes. The fused pleuroperitoneal membranes, remember, they form the central tendon of the diaphragm. The musculature of the diaphragm is derived from cells migrating from which specific spinal segments? C3 to C5, I told you the third cervical to fifth cervical, they contribute to the muscle cells which are going to migrate into the diaphragm. So that concludes with today's discussion on the development of diaphragm. And this is an important topic. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to ask those questions in the comments box below the video. And don't forget to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel, AnatomyMentor, and press the bell icon so you can get regular updates of my lectures, which are not just on embryology, but also covering other topics related to histology, gross anatomy, and as well as neuroanatomy. And thank you and best of luck. Stay blessed.